Hello, bookworms. Another book review from me, and I want to review a book called Real Bad Arabs: How Hollywood Vilifies a People, and it's written by a guy called Jack Shaheen, who's actually Professor Jack Shaheen, who sadly has passed away now. But I picked this book, I think this was published in about 2001, and I picked it up something like about 2001, something like that. And as you can see, it says Real Bad Arabs, REEL, Bad Arabs. And it was really about basically the treatment of Arabs and Muslims in Hollywood and how they're actually depicted in the movies. Now, I've always been aware that, Arabs have been shown in a particular way in the movies. It's always yeah, come into my shop and I will give you some tea and then kill you with a dagger, or that kind of thing. Or it's the kind of sheikh who's got so much money, he goes like, come on, you give me a cup of tea, I'll give you 10 bricks of gold or something like that, or something like that. Or it's just simply a guy with a tea towel on his head going, Allahu Akbar, and blows something up. There's always been that kind of stereotype, and I thought it's just one of those things that, you see. But Professor Jack Shaheen, who, by the way, is an Arab American, born in Pittsburgh. His dad was like a factory worker in America. Funnily enough, most of the Arab Americans in the United States are actually Christian, and Professor Jack Shaheen is actually a Christian. He's not Muslim at all, but he realized that there was this, stereotyping of Arabs, and he wanted to kind of do some kind of a more scholarly study on it. So anyway, what Professor Jack Shaheen did was, and he's, by the way, Professor Emeritus of Mass Communications at Southern Illinois University, former CBS News consultant on Middle East affairs, and the world's foremost authority on media images of Arabs. He's the author of Arab and Muslim Stereotyping in American Popular Culture, Nuclear War Films, and a book called The TV Arab. But this was a book that I picked up called Real Bad Arabs. And what I thought was incredible about this was he literally has taken every Hollywood movie from the 20th century, and what he's done is he's listed it. He's given a sort of small filmography of it, of what the story is, who's starring in it, and he's listed the kind of images of Arabs and Muslims, and mostly Arabs basically, and how they're put across in Hollywood. Now, this is like movies from things like, if I open it, he's got something like Days of Wines and Roses from 1962, starring Jack Lemmon, Lee Remick. Two American alcoholics fall in love, perhaps intending to instill a sexual atmosphere. The producer inserts a belly dancer, blah, 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 blah. So basically, the 4-minute Arab scene concludes with the camera focusing on several women about to cuddle His Oil-Rich Highness. So again, it's like women and, the sex. Often the Arabs are portrayed in Hollywood as being basically sex mad. And usually what they want to do is they want to buy a blonde woman, a blonde Western virginal woman. And that's kind of like the stereotype that comes up in more than one movie. In fact, the last movie I remember seeing a movie called Never Say Never Again with Sean Connery, where he came back as James Bond. And Kim Basinger is basically abducted, taken off to the desert, and she's being auctioned off to these, Arabs who usually have bad teeth and, badly cut beards and pretty scruffy, and she's been auctioned off to these guys. It might look like me actually, but anyway, so that's that. And there's all sorts of movies. This is like basically every movie that references an Arab in the 20th century. So there's all things like The Happy Hooker Goes to Washington, never even heard of, 1977. A perverted militant sheikh speaking with a high-pitched effeminate voice tries to rule the world's economy. To foil the Arabs' ambitions, the CIA enlists the bedroom skills of a noted blonde hooker. Blah blah blah. Who's that starring? I'm not sure, but it's got Joey Heatherton, Jeremy Fisher. I mean, I've never heard of that, but there's other movies that you will have heard of, like, um, well, just every movie you can think of. The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, 1958. Tale of the Mummy, 1998. Three Ninjas from 1992. Basically, he's done is he's gone round and listed every single movie. Now, the amazing thing is that you'd think, okay, 1,000 movies, there's going to be some negative stereotypes, there's going to be some decent images. But what he found was that 97% of the images of Arabs and Muslims portrayed in Hollywood were overwhelmingly negative. 97%. Just think of that. So in other words, only 3% had any kind of positive image. And there were some good movies that showed that. There's a good movie called I think it's one with Antonio Banderas called The 13th Night. Pitch Black was another one. But overall, 97%. Now, you'd say, okay, fine, movies are all about making money and who cares? They're not meant to be representative of what, of what reality is. But the fact is, what he says, and it's very true, is that most of our internal programming doesn't come from what we read. It doesn't come from what we studied. It comes from what we watched on TV and in the cinema. What we think about most of the stereotypes tends to come from Hollywood. And basically 97% of the images in the 20th century were overwhelmingly negative. Now, I was kind of shocked at that when I thought 97, well, like, to actually think it's 97% is kind of shocking. I thought, okay, maybe there's about 60% are bad. But he does this in a lot of he researches this in a lot of details. He spent something like 20 years basically writing this. And there's various things that he says. I mean, just opening it here. Pause and visualize the real Arab, as in the one that you see on TV. What do you see? Black beard, headdress, dark sunglasses. In the background, a limousine, harem maidens, oil wells, camels, or perhaps he's brandishing an automatic weapon, crazy hate in his eyes and Allah on his lips. Can you see him? Think about it. When was the last time you saw a movie depicting an Arab or an American of Arab heritage as a regular guy? Perhaps a man who works 10 hours a day, or comes home to a loving wife and family, plays soccer with his kids, and prays with family members at his respective mosque or church. He's the kind of guy you'd like to have as your next door neighbour because, well, maybe he's a bit like you. But would you want to share your country, much less your street, with any of Hollywood's Arabs? Would you want your kids playing with him and his family, your teenagers dating them? Would you enjoy sharing your neighbourhood with fabulously wealthy and vile oil sheikhs with an eye for Western blondes and arms deals and intent on world domination, or with crazed terrorists, airplane hijackers, or camel riding Bedouins? When you see it written like that and you think of the images of the Arab in Hollywood, then it becomes so obvious, like you can't unsee it. But that's exactly what we've been fed for most of a century. And he makes a really interesting point that a lot of groups started off with all these kind of weird stereotypes at the beginning of the 20th century. The Jewish person, the gay person, the black person, women even, okay? But Latinos, for example. But what he found was that all of them, by the time that they got to the end of the 20th century, had changed. The Jewish person was no longer portrayed in these kind of, like a Shylock with a hooked nose and, money grabbing. Very similar to Semitic images of Arabs, actually, funnily enough, although the Arabs have stayed the same in terms of Hollywood. Black people have obviously changed. You saw them at the beginning of the 1930s and Gone with the Wind, and there was The Servants and Oh Massa, then they went through the 70s with Shaft, and now, they're fully human characters. Gay people, women, for example, But the one character and one racial group that hasn't changed in the whole of the 20th century is the Arab and the Muslim. Now, I am aware that this book was published in 2001. 9/11 happened very soon after this book. And it's been about, it's 26 years, so it's a quarter of a century since this book was published. So some things have changed. There are movies out there. I hope, audiences in the West and throughout the world have begun to become more adult and are seeing things differently. Are there people that are representing Arabs in the movies? Yes and no. I think there are some odd names, but very few. And I saw literally an interview recently about the guy that was in the movie Aladdin, and he can't get any work. He got his first role in Aladdin, and he can't seem to get any work after that, apparently. So I don't know if that's stereotyping. I don't know if it's just him. But, I think those kind of images, people are desperately trying to peddle that image of the Arab and the Muslim in a certain way. Maybe it's gone more to social media, but in the movies, I hope it's not as common. But again, what he does say is that, look, it's only when you hunt down these stereotypes and when people actively fight against them that they change. He goes, the idea of the Irish changing in movies only changed because the Irish did something about it. Catholics did something about it. Jewish people have done something about it, but and they actively changed it in the 1930s. Nazi Germany, Jews were very much represented in the way that Muslims are now, but a lot of Jewish people are involved in the movie industry, and they have changed that. Gay people have changed the way that they're portrayed because they've actively gone out and demonstrated. So perhaps it's time that Muslims and Arabs actually do that. And I think this is probably one of the probably pioneering works to actually change people's ideas and actually look at it. And like I said, he's got, 1,000 movies here that he's listed in a lot of detail. I'm just opening it up. I'm trying to think of something that somebody would know. And here's an interesting thing. In the 20th century, there were certain categories that the Arab and the Muslim was always put in. So this was interesting. There are certain categories that they're always put in as. Let's see if I can just find them. So the categories they're roughly something like villains, oil-rich sheikhs, terrorists, Egyptians, lots of Egyptians, they are a category on their own, and also Palestinians. And I think he said something like a third of the representations of the Palestinians literally happened between about 1980 and 1990. And there's a company called Canon Films, produced by a couple of Israeli producers called Golan Globus, who literally made something like half of the negative representations of Palestinians. And it's hard not to see that as just being complete propaganda. So he makes a particular mention of them. I'll try and just... 1 second. So he starts up the various categories that they're named under as villains. So they're often usually the villains. And he mentions that even though there were plenty of Arab Americans that fought in the World Wars and in World War II, they're almost never shown as being heroic figures in any World War II movie. And that actually goes for Indians as well. Something like 2 million Indians fought in World War II. Some of them were like my granddad and my granddad's brother, who went to France and never came back. And yet hardly ever do you ever see an Indian representation of anybody in World War II. So there are villains, there are sheikhs. So there's the Arab sheikh who's just got so much money. I remember watching movies like the Cannonball Run, where the guy does his run in a limousine and just throws money around. There's the whole thing about the maidens. So Arab women are always shown as subservient, either dressed in burqas or that kind of like funny see-through pantaloons, a bit like Genie and all that kind of thing. And also Arab men don't really want them. They want the blonde women and will do anything to get them. So they're always shown as, the Arab men are always shown as lustful. You know, Egyptians is another caricature. They appeared in more than 100 movies, from the mummy tales to legends of pharaohs and queens to contemporary scenarios. So they're usually souk swindlers and begging children, scratching for bakshish. The funny thing is, all of these stereotypes, actually, when you think about it, every time I've actually honestly gone to one of these souks, people are actually quite nice. Okay, they might try and haggle a bit, but often they'll be quite nice. They'll give you a cup of tea. I mean, that kind of hospitality, the hospitality is very rarely shown. Another one is Palestinians. That was another group. Palestinians became a big thing from about the 80s onwards. And he goes into this in a big deal. More than half of the Palestinian movies were released in the 1980s and 1980s. 19 from 1983 to 1989, 9 from 1990 to 1998. Absent from Hollywood's Israeli-Palestinian movies are human dramas revealing Palestinians as normal folk. And why would you? Because the object is to dehumanize Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims as much as you can. Because then you can kill them. You can do whatever you want to them. They are not human beings. Very rarely are they revealed as Palestinians as normal folks. Computer specialists, domestic engineers, farmers, teachers, and artists. Never do movies present Palestinians as innocent victims and Israelis as brutal oppressors. No movie shows Israeli soldiers and settlers uprooting olive orchards, gunning down Palestinian civilians in Palestinian cities. No movie shows Palestinian families struggling to survive under occupation. Never is it shown where they have to deal with things or have to go through sentry points or checkpoints and being literally corralled like animals, or living in refugee camps, striving to have their own country and passports stating Palestine. Disturbingly, only 2 scenarios present Palestinian families. Watching these, and this is the words of Professor Jack Shaheen, watching these, I question the defamation of Palestinians. Is there an unwritten cinematic code stating Hollywood will present all Palestinians as irrational and bad, and all Israelis as rational and good? 1 year after the State of Israel was born, the film Sword of the Desert, 1949, presented Palestine according to the popular Zionist slogan, as a land without a people, even though the vast majority of people living in Palestine at the time were in fact Palestinians. This myth that no Palestinians reside in Palestine is also served up in Cast a Giant Shadow in 1966 and Judith in 1966 as well. A decade after Sword of the Desert, Paul Newman declared war on the Palestinians in Exodus in 1960. Hollywood's heroes followed suit. In Prisoner in the Middle, 1974, David Janssen links up with Israeli forces. Together, they gun down Palestinian nuclear terrorists. Films from the 1980s, such as The Delta Force and Wanted Dead or Alive, present Lee Marvin, Chuck Norris, and Rutger Hauer blasting Palestinians in the Mideast and in Los Angeles. In the 1990s, Charlie Sheen and Kurt Russell obliterate Palestinians in Lebanon and aboard a passenger jet in Navy SEALs, and an executive decision in 1996. Basically, Professor Jack Sheen says that Canon was the film production company in the late 20th century. He believed that their poisonous scenarios are not accidental, but rather propaganda disguised as entertainment. Even in the early 1900s, studio moguls knew that motion pictures could serve propagandists. Following World War I, Adolf Zukor, the head of Paramount Pictures, affirmed this film as propaganda fact, saying fiction films should no longer be viewed as simply entertainment and amusement. And the war used it indisputably the fact that as an avenue of propaganda, as a channel for conveying thought and opinion, the movies are unequaled by any form of communication. So there's no doubt that people are well aware of the fact that movies can be used to propagandize, they can be used to dehumanize, and the idea is that they produce a narrative that we all need to go away and we subconsciously take on. What else can I say about this? One of the things that the Professor Jack Shaheen says is you can with Arabs and they are Semites, you can look at them and replace the word Arab with Jew and see what effect that has. And if you had the same sort of portrayal or described the Arab in the same way and just replace the word Jew, it would make a big difference. Suddenly you wouldn't do it. It would be seen as just you couldn't do it. It'd just be not allowed. And I think there is a point to that. The Arab has been this sort of lazy go-to to put all these stereotypes on. And it's not just a laziness. He said there's a propagandist element to it. And unfortunately that is there. But I think Arabs themselves and Muslims themselves have to really fight back against that. But also other people should. Why? Because, the idea is that once you create the subhuman, inhuman, you dehumanize another person, then what happens is you allow your politicians to do whatever they want to these people. So it's like, the American Indian was wiped out because Hollywood partly did portray, the American Indian in a certain way. People could do things to Jewish people in Germany and Europe because they were portrayed a certain way. And that didn't just happen with the Nazis. That's been going on for a long time. We could do things we could inter American Japanese who were Americans in concentration camps at the beginning of the century because of the images that we showed of them. Chinese were shown as chopsucky, Fu Manchu, bent on world domination, that kind of thing. And that came through Hollywood. So it is important to fight back against these stereotypes. The Irish, how were the Irish displayed in Hollywood? The black people, women, gay people. So I think it's important to be aware of these things. And I think because this book, like I said, was published in 2001, I think a lot of things have changed in the quarter century since it was published, because I think people are just more aware. And even on TV programs, when people are, even on chat show programs, when people talk about things in a certain way, it becomes really obvious who's pushing a narrative and a stereotype. Anyway, this is Real Bad Arabs, How Hollywood Vilifies a People, by Professor Jack Shaheen. It's quite an old book. I picked it up in a secondhand bookstore, but it's like literally a list of 1,000 movies over the 20th century, and you can go into it. And it's actually quite shocking when you realize that 97% of the images are overwhelmingly negative. And when you see it in those figures and that only 3% were positive, it's no wonder that we have an image of the Muslim and the Arab on TV that is a certain way. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Real Bad Arabs, How Hollywood Vilifies a People by Professor Jack Shaheen. Thanks.